Welcome to the second episode of RGA and RGAX's Technovate North America webinar series. I'm Chris Mermetz, RGAX America's Managing Director, and I'll be moderating today's session. RGA's Technovate Labs promote innovation initiatives within the life and health insurance sector and create connections between RGA and RGAX's global network to startups and our partners so that we can explore innovation opportunities and trends together. Live Technovate events normally include industry panels, sprints, startup pitch competitions, among other things. Sadly, global circumstances preclude us from hosting you in person this year. However, we decided to take this opportunity to launch an online Technovate series to complement our live lab experience. So welcome to the second of 3 online Technovate experiences. Today's webinar, Evolution of the Consumer Purchase Journey, Will Insurance Distribution Bounce Back or Bounce Forward in Response to COVID-19, will be presented by Peter Rhodes. You'll see on your screen, RGAX's Innovation Advisory Council lead. And over the hour, we'll discuss how insurers have adapted their business models in response to COVID-19 and to consumers' growing needs. We will explain how COVID-19 has impacted consumer attitudes about insurers and their willingness to purchase. We will also share strategies and specific actions insurers can take to enhance traditional distribution while enhancing the customer experience. Peter is the Vice President, Innovation and Advisory Services for RGAX, the transformation engine of Reinsurance Group of America. Peter is based in Chicago and as a leader of the advisory practice and helps our carriers develop new and innovative solutions and selectively partner with InsurTech ecosystem to more quickly ideate, validate, and scale initiatives faster, cheaper, and with less risk. Peter joins RGAX with more than 25 years of experience in healthcare, marketing, and insurance. He's worked with market leaders such as Wonderman Health, digital agency for life insurance, pharmaceutical, medical devices, and other health and wellness verticals, and various health plans such as Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois and HealthNet. Peter graduated from the Wake Forest University with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and holds an MBA as well as a Master's in Health Service Management and Policy degree from the University of Michigan. Peter also holds a producer's license for life and accident insurance. He's a frequent industry speaker on topics of consumer engagement and direct-to-consumer marketing.
You know, today we're in the middle of this second or third wave of the infection, and this notion of bouncing back or bouncing forward is really relevant. I'm very optimistic. I believe we're poised to bounce forward, and I'm really excited to share today with everybody who's on the video my thoughts on an innovation toolkit and how we can make that bounce forward happen faster, less expensive, and with less risk. So I've structured my comments really into 3 kind of topical areas. First, I'm going to start with what's happened on the consumer side, with a little bit of detail, and then I'm going to talk about the initial carrier reaction, and then I'll introduce our innovation toolkit and how we can help you bounce forward. But the other thing is I want to make sure that we really have an engaging conversation today. That's a little tough with the Zoom format. So to spice it up a little bit, we're going to do some Q&A, some polling questions. Chris will help us moderate. There'll be 3 of those throughout. So stay on your toes. I'll be looking for your input so that we can add to this presentation, make it valuable for everybody. So let's go ahead and jump in. So in taking Jeffrey's macro view now a little bit closer into the life insurance, I've put what I think are the 4 stages of how we've reacted to it. That first stage of shock and lockdown, I don't know if you all can remember back in March, it was very personal when it really struck you that this was going to be a serious business. I remember when it was real for me is I travel a lot, and RGA put the travel ban in place. I was due to travel down on Monday to greet a new employee, not going to do that. I went shopping later that week through the grocery stores. If you can remember, we went down the toilet paper aisle, not a lot to be seen. So there was that initial shock and panic. I think as we moved quickly into the temporary adjustments, the industry really responded by implementing some changes to their evidence and the underwriting programs, allowing higher face amounts to be issued, tweaking some of the underwriting rules. We had a lot of conversations with our clients around that. Really, the industry was trying to keep new business flowing, and I think they were successful in doing that. Then we transitioned into the back to business or the work from home life that we're in today. And for some, that was pretty seamless. They had prepared or had a lot of mobile workforce. For others, it was a heavier lift. But I think we've made our way through the work from home and return to work. And now we're in the stage 4, really understanding what opportunities have been made available and how do we adapt to these challenges. Clearly, this rise in this next wave has said, okay, it may push us back a little bit, but how are we going to move forward with these challenges? So what's interesting is just to emphasize what Jeffrey had said, is I've really noticed in my carrier conversations, this desire to innovate has really gone through the roof. People are coming up to us using our virtual offerings to help them continue to innovate. That appetite has really picked up. So I think that's been helpful. The other main point for us in getting it drilled down into distribution is to state the obvious. COVID's created a massive obstacle. I call it really took away the kitchen table. So a lot of face-to-face selling activities have had to transition through social distancing and whatnot. And that's really caused a big disruption. As we know, a lot of our sales are done face-to-face and through the agent channel. We've had to adapt to that pretty quickly. So let's look on the next slide about the consumer attitudes and behaviors. So I was fortunate enough to be appointed to a LIMRA steering committee back in the early summer. They were doing a customer experience survey to reach out to consumers and really understand what happened pre, during, and post COVID, the three kind of phases. And they really went out and fielded a survey in the June and July timeframe, partnered with Boston Consulting Group to really get a pulse on what was happening. They published their results just last month. For many of you, I'm sure you're participants with LIMRA. They did it at their annual meeting, and it's available on their website. I'm going to share a few of the excerpts that I thought were really relevant to that research. So first, the high degree of trust and confidence in agent distribution remains unquestioned. It's really important on the consumer side to have that trust and confidence, and nothing replaces an agent today to provide that. Jeffrey talked a little bit about the younger shopper, and I'm going to show you some evidence of that. And then importantly, there continues to be a broad knowledge gap between buyers and shoppers. So I want to show these to you in kind of graph form. You go next. So what we're seeing here on the buyer side, if you just look at those that strongly agree with this statement about being confident, look at that gap between the buyer and the shopper. And then if you go down in just to the agree format, it's equally strong. So, I would submit to you what stops a shopper from becoming a buyer is that lack of confidence. That's the importance, I believe, of the agent channel. It really provides that information. If you go to the chart on the right, when we talk about the shoppers specifically, it was interesting. They said, what were some of the problems? What made it harder? And most of these things are about getting information, filling that knowledge gap. But I've highlighted in yellow, and we'll do so throughout the presentation, where we've also seen some process issues. So you can see there's friction around scheduling a medical appointment, getting the evidence for underwriting, and then something as simple as submitting a signature was also creating a problem in the customer experience. So here's a really important point, and I think it's a little bit obvious, but I think it's important to make, is the shift in the way people are buying. So if you look to the left, the in-person buying before versus after, you can see that the significant drop. People are not able to get access to the consumer, that kitchen table, and the rise in the hybrid or the online portion. So there's a mixture happening, exactly as you'd expect. If you look at the generational shift, though, I think it's really stunning. Look at that high number of the younger generation that prefers the hybrid and online. It's really significant. If you look at the red bar, it almost drops straight down. People still prefer, not according to generation, the in-person contact, but that younger generation really appreciates the hybrid online component that's taken over. If we continue on, this one, we were looking at a change in the consumer motivations to purchase during the pandemic. A little bit different. If you look at the legend here, this was a 3-year comparison, looking at what happened in 2017, and then LIMRA looked at it in 2020. What I'd call out the very first thing is price is still king, always important, but it's mentioned less than 50% of the time is the most important issue. In the solid bars, what you see, those are all product or coverage related desires. So given the pandemic, it's helped frame the type of coverage, and people are explaining what they're looking for, and you can kind of see those. And then the next set of bars, these are some of the process issues. Again, the medical exam coming up as being an issue and wanting a simpler application process. So when we take all these consumer expectations and we intersect it with the carrier, I like this image of the iceberg because there's things that we see above the water and then there's a lot happening underneath the surface. So, coming into this year, Jeffrey was talking about it, and I went to the LIMRA barometer study. Purchase intent for our coverage is at a 10-year high at 36%. You've got a pandemic that's raising awareness levels off the charts. You saw the application volume that Jeffrey mentioned from MIB, the quarter over quarter. Despite all that increase, we're only seeing a modest overall increase in the number of policies sold. I think that part of that is because of the getting access to the consumer, and I hope that we're going to play that out and see stronger growth going forward. So I believe there's a great opportunity to increase above the waterline. But I want to dive underneath the waterline, some of the shifts that are happening. So I think on the product mix side, what you're seeing is a general uptick in term policies. I think it's an easier to understand, easier to sell, easier to buy online. So term has gone up and universal life has also. What's interesting is most annuity sales have struggled a little bit. A little bit of that is the complexity of that product, but I think it's also the interest rate environment. And Jeffrey also mentioned there's just a high degree of interest in the retirement planning in general. So a lot of the agents are spending time educating on the retirement plan. When we look at channel mix, I want to call out something. I would have anticipated, in fact, we saw this, a shift to some of the direct-to-consumer. If the face-to-face is challenged, what do we see in the in the direct-to-consumer channel? We work with two direct-to-consumer only marketplaces. And it's interesting. One of them saw in the months after 100% increase in sales volume, and the other a 250% increase in volume. So clearly there was a very large response in the direct-to-consumer side of things. When we dug a little deeper, one of those carriers reported some interesting findings that I just wanted to highlight for you. There was a pronounced shift in the demographics. They had reported a 35% female ratio, went up to 40%. I think women are a little more risk averse than men and responded in the COVID. That's kind of my analysis on why we went from 35 to 40%. On the shift in the demographics to the younger age, it was pretty pronounced for this direct-to-consumer player. They saw pre-pandemic about 66% of their applicants were under the age of 50. It went up to 82%. So clearly a rise there. The other thing is there was a modest increase in the face amounts. It exceeded the $500,000 mark. And so we saw that creep up a little bit. What was interesting on the carrier side is it was a mixed bag. There were some carriers that were well positioned and they saw a significant a significant sales increase, and that there were some that saw a sales decrease, whether that be because they weren't as actively selling, focusing on their in-force, or just market conditions. But it was kind of a mixed bag. So if we go forward, just wanted to bring in the carrier perspective here. So we've gone over the consumer view, the intersection on the sales. On the carrier side, we're fortunate to work with one of our portfolio companies, Asset Map. We co-sponsored a survey that went out to 25 different insurance distribution leaders to get insights into the recent market pressures, how they're responding to COVID. Asset Map is an interesting advice-led tech company that enables client engagement and really helps digitize some of the agent work. And they'll be publishing the results here in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, I wanted to share some of the top-line findings. So where there was clear consensus is the carrier marketplace is committed to developing and recruiting the human advisors. They are actively training and arming with tech so that they can reach out to the customers. And there's clearly also a focus on existing relationships. Clearly, those are easier to gain access to. Getting the new relationship started is a bit of a challenge. Where things were different is it was interesting. In the early days, they reported a 50-50 split. Some agents were able to spend more time with clients and some less. And I think that was in large part due to the level of tech engagement. So I know on the call today, we've got a heavy skew towards carriers, but we also have some distributors. I want to lead it into our first poll question to get your point of view on some of what we've talked about so far. Chris?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll read the question real fast. You will all see a box pop up on the screen, and I think we have just about around 100 kind of attendees. So what we'll do is I'll read the question. You'll see there you go. You'll have 30 seconds as soon as I finish reading. In response to COVID, what consumer action has had the greatest impact on your company? So if you don't mind ticking a box, hit submit. Okay. So in response to COVID, what consumer actions had the greatest impact on your company? So clearly you're seeing the standout being the decrease in consumer sales, which we heard about that a little bit. Gaining access to consumers is pretty high. So when you think about this, Peter, decrease in consumer sales, that's nothing of a surprise for you there, I take it?
Yeah, well, interesting, right? I was seeing the early results were balanced, and the greatest impact here is a little overweighted on the decrease. It's nice to see that there's some that are actually seeing the increase, right? So I mentioned that some of the other survey work had those a little bit closer. But we've got a reasonable size sample, like you said. Interestingly, that gaining access to consumers is a real issue. 1 out of 4 people mentioned it. So I think that's kind of interesting.
And just so you know, the one of the other types, so demand for digital was what was put in the chat. So you're definitely seeing more of that. So digital throughout the entire, not just at the front end, but digital throughout the entire process, as both you, Jeffrey, and Peter talked about.
Perfect. Okay. So let's move forward. So let's just ground ourselves, take a deep breath. What's the big picture? I believe that COVID has created a unique opportunity to engage with our prospects and customers. It's how are we going to take advantage of this opportunity? And in talking with carriers, it's interesting. A lot of these strategies have been in place, but it's kind of placed a renewed emphasis, urgency, and funding. So when I ask people what's the impact, they really say it one of 3 ways. It's I want to improve that customer experience. You even heard that write-in vote. I'll call it, Chris, the investments in the digital transformation and really innovating efforts around the entire new business and underwriting process. So that's really the big picture. How are we going to take advantage of this opportunity going forward? So I want to introduce the customer experience lifecycle to talk about this in a little more detail. So this is your typical customer journey, but what I've done with the icons and whatnot, I've really customized it for the insurance industry. So the typical consumer will go through these steps. It'll start with awareness, consideration, purchase, service, and loyalty. But just to walk you around the wheel here, the awareness in green here, you can see some of the icons. I've chosen those. To create awareness, you can do the promotion with the megaphone. There can be some word of mouth advertising. Really, the goal of awareness is to create interest. Next, you move into the consumer choice idea. So this is where all the searching, rating, reviews take place. But considerations should lead to a choice. The third aspect is the purchase journey. The goal of the purchase journey is to create transactions, to create premium revenue for us. After a policy's been purchased, you move into the service cycle. So the goal of service is to create customer satisfaction. We're going to do that by paying claims and engaging with our customers in a way that's helpful for them. And if we're really good, we're going to move into the loyalty aspect of a relationship. That loyalty is going to be manifest itself in higher retention rates, better cross-sell, upsell, and increasingly, I think, wellness and improving the health and financial wellness of our clients. So with that, we'll move on to how do we help improve that experience? If that's kind of the landscape of that, I want to introduce this notion of a framework for you. So early in my career in a consulting capacity, we used to talk about people, process, and technology. Anytime you want to do process improvement, you kind of boiled it into these 3 ingredients to look at that would help impact or improve an experience. So think about that. What I've added over time is I've kind of modified it a little bit. I think increasingly there's an opportunity to bring data and insights into the innovation part of it. As we become increasingly digital, things I call the data exhaust of the consumer experience is increasingly available. That provides keen data and insights to act upon. The other thing that I think is key is a point of view. I think it's interesting about the different functional roles. We as a reinsurer are kind of a unique position for that point of view. And then lastly, the execution aspect. I think it's really bundling the prior 5 aspects into execution. And it's really about the quality of the execution that really helps drive the innovation process. If I kind of layer in the RGA toolkit that kind of maps to these things, I just want to spend a minute and talk about how we can bring some of these things to the table for our carrier clients. So on the people side, it's kind of interesting. We offer, as part of RGAX, a lot of the business process outsourcing for both underwriting and claims. We can do a staff augmentation or a complete outsourcing. So we can bring the people element to help you improve the customer experience. On the process side, we do benchmarking, we do design, we provide some optimization services. So when you're looking to fine-tune an existing process, we can help you with that. On the technology side, it's kind of interesting. I think we have our own homegrown underwriting solutions. We have Aura Next, which is a terrific tool that helps automate a lot of the underwriting process and decrease the cycle time. But also importantly, as Jeffrey mentioned, on the tech side, there's also a vast array of insurtech partners. And so we, in response to working with insurtech partners, we've got 2 solutions. We've done some direct venture investing where we'll directly partner with some, but we'll also communicate and work with the larger ecosystem. But in select cases, we'll make investments. We also have our own innovation lab. We call it the Innovation Studio. And so we'll work with carriers and tech partners to actually develop proof of concepts to help them improve their process. On the data and insights side of things, RGA has its own data products. We've got some risk evaluation tools. We'll also do some custom analysis and assignments based upon that data exhaust that I mentioned to help drive customer experience improvements. I touched on this briefly. I think our point of view is pretty interesting as a global reinsurer. We bring ideas from around the globe. And the whole reason of RGAX is the commitment to innovation. RGA made a significant commitment to transform and grow the industry, and that's manifest in what we do. So I think that's key. The other thing that's part of that point of view is how we're different from others is, insurance is what we do. So we're not just a general advisory or consultancy business. We really bring that insurance expertise. And then ultimately on the execution side, we can be held accountable for that in the form of reinsurance. We'll also develop roadmaps and help you guide and implement that change to get the results you're looking for. So with that, Chris, I want to turn back to you to get a little more input. We've got 2 poll questions for our audience.
Yep. So as you think about bouncing forward, which of the 6 levers are most critical to your organization's effort? So as you look at the box, that's the first question. Inside the box, if you scroll down, you'll see the second question. For which of those 6 levers do you feel that you're most likely to look outside your organization for help? And on the second one, you can hit whichever, as many that are of interest to you. So again, we'll give you 30 seconds and please answer both. So as you think about bouncing forward, which of the 6 levers are most critical to your organization's effort? It is. If I look at the first one first, I'm a little bit surprised technology is above people. Like we talked about digital process, digital platforms, and being able to digitally enable. So I'm sure that's a lot was driving it. But when you look at the first one, Peter, does that surprise you at all? Or data insights being a little bit on the lower side? What do you think? Yeah,
exactly. I agree with you. Interesting. We're leading with tech. I think tech and people largely the same. But I'm a little bit surprised by the data and insights, and quite frankly, also the execution. It's one thing as they say, execution or strategy eats culture for lunch, right? So I think execution's important. I'm a little surprised that that's underweighted.
And on the second side, you'll see technology fairly significantly above everything else, which isn't really surprising, given we've got a heavy carrier audience. But what do you think about the second part of this question?
Yeah, well, I think it's also true for us, right? I mean, I think it's hard to attract the best and brightest inside the insurance companies. I think that's why the insurtech landscape has flourished. And so I think it's a natural part that how do you get the best out of that ecosystem? There's hundreds of companies, and so that's an area that we collaborate a lot on how to bring that in. And again, we've invested in some of the core automation on that tech with Aura, but I think that's a really important aspect to do this. And increasingly, that whole digital nature, we've got to bring that convenience to the journey, and tech does that. It is interesting here also, Chris, to point out the rebound in the data and insights, right? So while it may not be as important as noted above, people do look to get some outsourcing support for that, which I think is appropriate. As you and I know, we're surrounded by data scientists and actuaries, and can bring a focused effort to that. I think that's really important to help drive changes in the customer experience.
Yeah, and there's one comment on that point. It says, I think the assumption is data will drive the technology, and I think that's definitely right. Like you're going to see a lot of talk about data, and again, both you and Jeffrey hit on that. The other point I don't want to lose sight of that you both touched on as well, which was talked about, I certainly believe in. I think partnerships going forward is going to be a bigger part of all of our businesses, right? It doesn't always mean an investor but like getting kind of being able to connect the right dots the right way. I think through partnerships is certainly going to be something that we're talking a lot more about, and I could see that being even more so as we roll forward in this environment.
Yeah, important. I'm going to spend a minute on that as we go forward in a few slides remaining. So when I think about that innovation toolkit, that by the way, very, very helpful to get your feedback, all the listeners out there. So how this framework can help structure your execution roadmap. One of the things that we talk about is getting the ability to do strategic experimentation. That experimentation is co-developing new products, new processes, or distribution solutions. So we've developed a virtual design sprint. We've taken the methodology. It used to be huddled around the whiteboard and sticky notes, and we've got some of our own tech and virtual enablement to help push the innovation ball forward. But the first part of that bullet is really important. As a facilitation piece, what we're really helping our clients do is get strategic alignment. What we find is that there's a lot of silos in the carriers, and so we'll be hosting a design sprint in a few days here, where it's nice. We're going to actually have the CEO of the insurer in the meeting, and they're going to be focusing on solving the distribution problem, and it's going to be from top to bottom. So it's going to be really force that strategic alignment. The other thing is it condenses it so it moves forward quickly, and so decisions, and it speeds that pace of innovation. The second bullet point is exactly what you mentioned, Chris. We're continuously monitoring and building strategic partnerships in the ecosystem, particularly around the product and the pricing aspect. We'll also look to bring in newer enhanced capabilities. That's a core function of what we do at RGAX. And lastly, I think this movement is really helping customers to evaluate their options. We have some capabilities to help design some of these customer experiences. We'll go through a testing, that experimentation, to help refine it to really build a better customer experience. So let me talk a little bit more about the strategic experiments side. So this is that life design sprint methodology that I talked about. Is we have this notion of a life cycle of a new idea or concept. It moves from the concept development through validation, prototype, and scale up. This is how we bring new ideas to market. This is ingrained in what we do. The design sprint sits on the cusp of a concept and moving towards validation. This is where we interact with a lot of our clients who want to bring a new product concept or a new idea to market, and they really would like our input on whether that be some of the pricing assumptions. We'll bring in outside experts. We call them masterminds, where they can respond to it, whether they be benefit consultants. If they're going to sell, if it's an individual product, we may bring in individual brokers and distributors. We may bring in consumers, but we really kind of smoke test the idea and help refine new products. Then that would move into prototype. Again, we have our own prototyping capabilities, or we can partner with our clients to do that. The key elements, you've got to be able to create that digital, or we'll create an MVP sort of a product to be tested. and then we'll transition to our carrier partners for the scale up and release into the wild for our strategic experiments. So this notion of partnerships, I think this is an important area. I want to highlight Asset Map. So I referenced them earlier. We worked with them to do the consumer research, but I think they're a good example, particularly relevant to our elevating the customer experience in distribution today. If you look to the right, that's a screenshot of their software. This can be both consumer and agent-led, and it really enables them to kind of do that needs analysis and make sure it's been very thorough and complete. And so you can look at the types of information that's being collected. Asset Map is new to our portfolio. We joined forces in the early spring, and we're really pleased with that relationship. They are helping to tech enable some of our carrier clients, and they really bring added growth and some of that sales lift that the carriers are looking for. So that's a great example of a partnership and a tech element that's been brought outside a company to help spur the business and improve the customer experience. The other example I've listed here on the page is where we've partnered with TransUnion. We built that True Risk Life product. It's a risk scoring solution that's been broadly adopted by the marketplace. It's shown to have that protective value. It's an example of really working with an outside party to bring a better solution to marketplace. So we've helped kind of validate that, and we've got some good exposure as a result. So I wanted to just spend a minute on this idea of focusing on improving the purchase journey. Of all the 5 areas that you see in a typical purchase journey, the area that I think has had the greatest intensity has been around the purchase journey. And I've also highlighted it because this is our topic today around the distribution. So if you look at on the left, number 1 is kind of the agent journey. And we've talked a lot about through the findings of what Asset Map has brought to the table, some of the automation and tech getting the kitchen table back in front of the consumer. On the right, we've also got the direct-to-consumer journey, which really requires a lot of these micro journeys. These micro journeys are, what does it look like for an e-sales, e-application? You saw earlier in one of my slides talking about the importance of just e-signature. It's called out as a significant sales impediment. If we're doing these things on the direct-to-consumer world, they can be ported over to the carrier channel. And then number 3 is kind of the biggie in my mind. This is the underwriting journey. That's where a lot of the effort and focus has been on. It's been about what evidence do we collect. We're always, as a reinsurer, always looking at additional forms of evidence that can replace, be cheaper, be more of a higher protective value. So there's always a conversation around the evidence collection. Importantly, that underwriting journey, there's a lot of processing that takes place. To what extent can AI or automation be put in place? Again, the ORNext solution really helps us with that overall processing to be more efficient. And then importantly, let's not forget, you've got to reach back out and have the communication to the consumer to make sure they understand the outcome and get it in as near real time as possible. So these are some of the aspects of focusing on the purchase journey I wanted to share with everybody. So in summary, when I think about this, it's about building your own innovation toolkit. I've given you an idea of kind of what that framework looks like, some of the tools that we have, but I think it's about building your own journey. And if you do that, you'll be able to really bounce forward with your distribution. So I kind of highlighted a couple things. I think one of the important things is to really understand and integrate the consumer impacts that I highlighted earlier into your distribution strategy. Key elements of that journey are about convenience and trust. So that convenience is largely digital. The trust, how do we create, to the extent that we move into a digital format, how do we create that same trusting environment or confidence that agents are able to provide or continue to provide? That is continues to be of huge importance. And the other trend that's happening is that move to that hybrid. So how do we look at these less as separate channels, but the consumer is going to be moving between them? And how do we enable that through the technology? I think that's a key ingredient. You're seeing that rise of that younger consumer and desire for hybrid. As you assemble your toolkit, how are you going to leverage that? I think it's important that you pursue this notion of the strategic experimentation. And that experimentation is not only going to be new and innovative products, but it's going to be in your processes. So I think those are important elements. And lastly, I think the partnership element is really key. At RGA, we stand committed to partner with our carrier clients through our innovation solutions that I quickly hit. We're talking about how to minimize risk, reduce costs, increase speed. All those things are going to help you transform the customer experience. And I think with those things in mind, you'll really be able to bounce forward through this COVID disruption. Chris, I'll turn it over to you. I think we've got a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Yes, we have a couple minutes left, but the one comment that came through that I do, it's an important one, and certainly one that I agree with, and that's an important, just to underline the point, digital does not equate to direct. Digital should allow consumer choice, and if consumers want advisor interface, we should allow that, even encourage and support this. And that's what we're seeing in the data, right? It's that trusted advisor is still an important part of the process, not for everybody, but you really want to enable that. And I guess that's why you see that bump in the hybrid model where people do get that, they want the confidence before to get to that buy purchase play. So thank you for making that.
The only comment I make, that earlier slide where you talked about the preferred method, do you remember on the red, across the generations, the first choice is still the agent and face-to-face. That's absolutely there. But I think that move to the hybrid says, I want to supplement that through that. So I agree with that comment about digital. I think today, 95% of our sales are still done through the agent. I think it goes back to the agent channel still preferred because it's convenient and the trust and confidence factors are so high. To the extent that digital can begin to help with that, I think you'll see a slight movement, but I agree with the comment. I just wanted to highlight a few of those other points.
We do have one question that just came through. In some countries, the e-signature is really hard to implement, mainly because of the current regulations, and in particular, for example, Mexico. So, how are we seeing, Peter? Any comment on how you're seeing maybe different regions implement or kind of get past some of these things?
Yeah, I don't think I can comment specifically on the e-signature element, other than to say I think the way that these changes in the customer experience, they're all going to be local, right? And that's a great example of perhaps one of the limitations. And so the ability to come forward with local solutions, I'd go back to how do we innovate? What are other businesses, how are the banks handling it? That's often, I look at the financial services sector that kind of sometimes leads what we do. How are they addressing the issue? Are there other experiences? And then the other thing we do, Chris, right, is we'll often look around the globe. So that may be a stumbling block in Mexico, but how are they tackling it in other countries that may resemble or have some of those same restrictions? I often have a keen eye on Asia. I think that's an exciting growth market. In some ways, are skipping some of our legacy processes and moving right into digital first enablement. So I think that's some of the ways.
And as you can see from my background, I sit in Toronto, and in some of the Canadian experiments I've been a part of, we started with it was years ago now, but you weren't allowed to do this because, and then the more you really dig into the problem and ask the 5 whys, we were able to get there. So I think absolutely it becomes something to deal with at the beginning, but I've never seen it as a pure roadblock. And one of the comments that came through was banks do it by working in the spirit of regulation, not the letter, and then they act collectively to push the envelope. So I think there's definitely working with regulators. There's a conversation to be had. And then again, the next comment that came through is you really have to look at what the customer and consumer experience is, and it's a better experience. So that tends to drive things. Well, to close out, I will say, thank you for attending today's webinar. So we have recorded the session, and I know there was one question that came through about sharing slides, so we recorded it, and in time we'll make it available for on-demand viewing. So please look for an email on that if you're an attendee today. And if you want to discuss anything further, please let us know. You can see Peter's email address up there, or reach out to any of your RGA representatives in your group or region. And as I said, we will have a survey to send out, so we kindly request that you have a look at that. The feedback is important to help us understand what works, what resonates, and where we can keep helping. And again, I'd really like to thank Peter for taking some time walking us through this today. I found it really interesting. I know a lot of this is in flight and kind of evolving as we go, but thank you for that. And I'll close it out. So I hope you have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Thank you.